I'm not going to ask you things. We're in Paris, 1819.
What's the game? Blackjack? Blackjack it is. How's it going?
Yeah, well, we're doing a stare down.
Yeah?
Yeah.
My favorite decision sheet room.
Yeah, I see.
Did you want a hand mic or were you okay with that?
We just need to. Something's right. Actually, we don't have to do both anymore. We didn't have to do before.
I think we're still doing it. From what I believe.
Okay.
From what I believe, I think we're still doing regular quick one for everyone at the end for the camera. I believe it's still doing it.
Okay. Yeah. Whatever. Yeah. Okay. That's great. I'm not going to be. We'll be sitting down. So.
Okay. Awesome.
That's right.
5 to 7.
5 to 7. Yeah. Everybody in the house. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, man. Congrats. Yeah, it's on that. It is? Yeah.
I was going to file for
Is this related to the first one? Or
It was great. It was yeah, it was 94 degrees this weekend. So I just got it and get out and sit in the sun and sit there and
you're smokers, you can't. You're afraid of you notice.
And then you get out and then you're like, oh, it's actually so hot. I was like,
Yes, it's a request for a plan.
I'm jealous. Yeah, you're going to review.
We will review. Oh.
Why?
Well,
Oh, so you're late.
it's going to be 7:15.
Yeah.
Should be.
Yeah, but also the arts. So
you think you're going to
we do. It's going to be, we all have to be out here.
So they put it up there. Let's do it. I'll keep those for you. Let's build this.
Yeah, that's the result. Just ask one question. You have to ask it before you leave, especially if somebody is talking, you have to ask.
My mom always says you can't have cake and eat.
Pretty good.
I know, I just found out that Eileen Miles, the poet, is also going to be in that issue. Yeah, it's like her friend, a poet, goes to me, and I thought they might read it. And they texted me back, and I realized that they're back today. It might be okay after the issue comes out. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm shocked.
So careful. I think it's okay. And I feel good.
Yesterday about this, and I was like, I already knew I already got a copy of the book, so I was expecting to see it.
Professor Wallace's, there were places from the greenhouse, his office is the office door directly across from the women's bathroom door, and I go to the bathroom so much, and his door is always open, so I'm always like, it's gotten really funny at this point.
It's a big deal.
So how is working at Cruise?
So we take, feels like we're singing this baby, and flip it to your lapel. You don't have to put it underneath your.
This is gonna take a second.
Okay.
It's like Christmas lights right now.
Yeah, I can help out.
Is this one for the online stuff?
So that's for the online stuff.
Should that be between us then? For both of us, to pick up both of us?
I think it should be fine. I think because it's like individually, I think it's like podcast, but that's fine.
Okay, so I'll put this one right here. Right? So because it wants both of us, right? It wants to pick up both of us.
All right, so there's two. There's two. So you don't have this one.
You'll have this one. Oh, I see. Oh, there are two of them. I didn't see this. Okay, great. So just leave it here?
Yeah.
We have
I would probably put it on to you. I know
both of them? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Same place?
It's up to you. You can close on
Look at this.
Look at this. There you go.
Yeah, they knocked me out. I get really bad. It's worth it, but
Is it on?
Perfect. This one on now?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome, yeah. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing this evening? Good. Thank you for coming out to Flyleaf this evening to hear Michael Keenan Gutierrez talk about his new book, SWILL. He is joined by Daniel Wallace. He was also an author of several of his own books. By purchasing your book from Flyleaf, you make it possible for us to have programs like this and many, many more, so we appreciate it on behalf of Flyleaf and my own. Thank you so much. We do close tonight at 7 o'clock, so we will be wrapping up just before then or a little bit afterwards. Please be mindful that a lot of our colleagues are cleaning up and whatnot and cleaning out the registers and want to close up. So if you want to have any conversations, take it outside, and that'll be really appreciated by us.
And there's no money in the registers, so I don't know if y'all are what you're here for, but there's no money there.
Absolutely not. Now I'd like to introduce furthermore for our authors tonight. Michael Keenan Gutierrez is the author of The Trench Angel and The SWILL. He lives with his wife and his son in Chapel Hill, where he teaches writing at the University of North Carolina. Daniel Wallace is the author of 6 novels. His 7th book, This Isn't Gonna End Well, The True Story of a Man I Thought I Knew, will be published by Algonquin Books in April 2023. I hope you enjoy. Thank you very, very much for supporting your local indie store. And furthermore, let's begin the event. Thank you.
Well, hi. Thank you all for coming. This is such an exciting night for me. I've been a big fan of Michael for a really long time, but not his work until now, because this is the first book by you I've read and I loved it. And it's called The SWILL, and I want to just let you bring everybody here into the story. Just give us just a thumbnail overview of this book, if possible.
Yeah, sure. It's possible. It was a surprise crime novel. I wasn't expecting to write one, and then somebody stole a painting about 5 drafts in, and that's where the book sort of materialized. I love crime novels. I've loved them for a long time, and but I always thought of myself as writing like straight, like literary family drama sort of thing. But a stolen painting was something I was really interested in, and so the book is about a family in a small town, or small city basically, called Port Kidd. It's basically a facsimile of New York and Boston. And this family has owned a bar for 150 years in sort of this rundown Irish neighborhood. The main character is an ex-war vet, and his sister is a thief. And when the ex-war vet has a pregnant wife and no money, his sister gets him to rob a public library where there was a nice painting. And then bad things ensue.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and it takes place in 1929.
It does.
In this the fictional town of Port Kidd, which you just said, based in large part on the Lower East Side.
Yes.
And what's I loved about this book is that, first of all, it's a really beautiful story, well told, but it's also a historical novel, in as much as a great deal of work went into researching the time and the place, the vernacular, every aspect of what it would be like to live in 1929. Would you give us just a little taste of it so we can see, illustrate what I was saying?
Let's start with the opening.
Yeah.
So, March 13th, 1929, Port Kidd. Ice spackled the basement panes, high up, out of reach. The old glass shivered but held. Elms froze and groaned. Sirens flared. And below the street, down in the old tavern, Joshua Rivers had just rung the bell for last call when his sister blew through the door. He hadn't seen her in almost a year, so when she came down with unsteady steps, like she hadn't been born upstairs, he almost didn't recognize her. She was dressed in the fashion of the day, a cloche hat and a satin blue dress just cut above the knees. But the way she wore it felt like a disguise. Her hair was pinned under the hat and her posture was sunken. Confidence got eyes following me across the floor, and the way she held herself told him that she wanted to disappear into the crowd. She slipped past the long table, two-stepping between a handful from the neighborhood, old men and women nursing their beers, stretching a dime until the end of the evening. At the piano, she tapped a couple of keys like she was making sure it had been kept in tune. It hadn't. From there, she pivoted toward the bookshelves, taking down a paperback, skimming a few pages, and then walking past him without so much as a nod, before settling against the bar. Her shoulders slackened, a sigh audible from across the room. He knew her game, so he went about ragging tables and emptying ashtrays, only pausing when a hand stopped on his hip and squeezed. The grabber was Marjorie O'Neill, an old bookkeeper who worked for a numbers runner over in Pine Box Square. They'd been coming to the SWILL since before Prohibition. She drank straight rum most nights, and when he was out of that, she drank straight whiskey, and when that was short, she took whatever she had behind the bar, straight. "Sit," she said. He sat. His hands fell on his lap, and he looked up at the splintering rafters, at the cobwebs, at the scratches and dents from raised fists and broken glasses, at the carvings of initials wrapped in hearts and skewered by arrows. "We never talked," Marjorie said. "Wasn't there a time when we talked all the time? You had such a beautiful voice back then." Across the room, his sister leaned over the bar, arm outstretched, coming up with a bottle of rail gin, no label. She poured a 4-count into a highball glass. No one else seemed to notice. "What happened to your voice?" Marjorie said. "So lovely, like an opera singer or a Nancy boy." "You mean Raphael?" he said. "My voice was never pretty." "Maybe you're right. It does sound awfully gravelly now, like a mule bucked you in the throat. You look younger than you used to. What's your secret? Witchcraft?" Joshua lit a cigarette and thanked her for the compliment. He'd take any he could get. He was a big man, 6'5", but like a lot of big men, he developed a slouch to escape doorway knocks and scared looks. He was also red-headed and soft-spoken, so that no one knew whether to find him threatening or simple. His face was babyish, nearly cherubic, and he had to take a razor to it only once a week. Still, he was 35, a war veteran, and no one was brave enough to tease him, at least in this neighborhood. They knew better. In the nicer parts of town, he looked like a red-headed ruffian, a guy you'd expect to find on wanted posters. But down in the Bonnie, his war exploits had made him famous, a local hero they could point to and say, "The Germans sure know they can't fuck with a boy from our neighborhood." He was also a business owner, a man with roots in the community, and the SWILL was at the center of it, or it used to be. In the old days, it was where the ward boss met his constituents, where the democratic machine planned its campaigns, On election day, people even came down there to vote. Joshua's grandmother had mediated truces between rival gangs, setting them up at the long table with pitchers of beer and acting as umpire when words got sharp. But that had all moved to nicer speakeasies. Even though the Bonnie saw the SWILL as an institution as sacred as the church itself, legacy didn't settle debts. What were you saying? You're having a baby, Marjorie said. No, my wife is. That's how it works, kiddo. The chatter picked up like a crowded intermission. Graveyard Rafferty, the local tanner, hands rubbed raw, eyes bloodshot, dropped 3 jacks on Lucy Green, a dog trainer laid up County Kerry. Lucy threw her cards across the table. You no good Scott bastard. Joshua tensed. He knew Lucy to be quick with a razor, but when she fell into Gabriel's lap for a kiss, he settled back down. If it's a boy, you sire, Marjorie said, you must be firm. Use the belt, but not the buckle. Then they know you're tough, but merciful. If you use the buckle, it's just out of meanness. No buckle, got it. Boys can grow up hard here, real mean, she said. It's a pity. My Johnny was too sweet for this world, but the army was good for him, made him a man. And got him killed, Joshua thought. But if you have a girl, kiddo, you go talk to the penguins over at St. Nicholas about sizing her up for a coif and veil. His sister reached for a neighboring pack of cigarettes. One's owned by Joni Avery, who was napping on the next stool over. She struck a match against her boot and brought the fire to her lips before blowing a cloud up to the rafters the way their grandmother used to. If not the convent, Marjorie said, then marry her as soon as she gets her woman's blood. Find a nice Danish boy. They don't beat their wives often, and their wrists are so delicate it don't hurt none if they do. I'll think on it, Joshua said, though figuring she'll go and make her own way. Right to the whore's bed if you don't get smart, kiddo. Believe me. Glad we had this talk. You were so much nicer in the old days.
That is so funny and so real, and that's the art. One of the arts in this book is that you take a time that very few of us, I would imagine, are that familiar with 1929 and what the actualities were, what the realities were. But you bring them to life and interlace them with the story of these actual people that you created. Why 1929?
I think when you write historical fiction, you're trying to write about today as much as yesterday. Mm-hmm. And in 1929, you have this whole legion of men who were destroyed by World War I. And when I started writing this, I was at the University of Houston, where I was teaching a lot of veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. And I was seeing different reactions to how they were reintegrating themselves into the world. And it struck me as like, okay, we're not, we never do enough for veterans. And there's some interesting things you can sort of delve into there. In addition, you have oncoming economic collapse, which is something we just kind of live with in general right now. And a sense of a power structure indifferent to the suffering of people who work with their hands. And I found all of that really resonant at the time I began writing this, and I still feel it really resonant right now.
Yeah, absolutely. But you said initially the plot point in this book of the stealing of the paintings, which is so important to the story and to the structure of it, but also just the feel of it and how it corresponds or doesn't correspond with what it's like to live. Poor kid wasn't there. What was there before the paintings were? You had that idea.
The book initially on the first draft was 500 pages long.
Wow.
It spread over about 150 years and had 4 different narratives. I was really ambitious then. And it took 2 years to write the first draft, which I finished the first draft in 2013.
Right.
I put it down several times. It wasn't like continuous.
No continuous writing night and day.
No. Yeah, there was like life. There was a baby somewhere came in the way.
Right.
And, not a lot of sleep and
You
terrible.
have a job as well, right?
A little bit of a job.
Yeah, a little bit of a job.
And so it started out that way, and this narrative was kind of always in there. And I think even in the first draft, the opening was always there. Like, I like the idea of somebody coming into a bar and just causing chaos. And so after the first and second drafts, I realized that about half the book was incredibly boring. Just tedious. I hated writing it. I hated reading it. And it's really hard to just like, okay, I have these 200, 300 pages. I just got to delete. But the painting came out of, I had a fellowship at the New York Public Library where I did a lot of the archival research here. And I just, on my lunch break, I'd walk around the New York Public Library and you see this beautiful artwork everywhere. And I thought about, like, you're seeing poor people and rich people, everyone conversing in this, in this place.
Nope, nobody move. Somebody was trying to get to the cash registers before they did. Well, you cannot leave until we discover who did it. Where were we? Oh yeah,
library.
Library, yeah.
So, and I saw a painting that was beautiful. And I knew I had a crooked sister involved with this too, and my own sister's going to hate reading this book. The last book also had kind of an off-kilter sister, and she's going to think there's a pattern.
Is there a pattern?
Yeah, probably. Well, I don't think she reads that much, so she might just buy it and put it in her
Does she know that you wrote this book?
I think so. And I thought, I just thought it would be something people would want to take. And I knew that I had a guy who was desperate, and I like putting pressure on characters to do things they don't want to do, but then they do it, and then they have to live with the consequences of it, and that's where it came about. And I kept coming back to this image, and the image kept changing, and as I got more into the family, the image kept being more integrated into the family and into the neighborhood, and it sort of became something that the book is centered around.
Yeah, absolutely. And poor Joshua, who does have the unfortunate curse of having a moral code, which never works out well for so many of us. But he has this responsibility for that he can't not be himself and can't not take responsibility, not only for himself, but for everybody.
Right.
Really.
It's also weighed on the fact is his wife's like 10 months pregnant.
Yeah.
Like super pregnant. And as I was writing this, I kind of I didn't go through the pregnancy part, but I watched somebody go through the pregnancy part. Yeah. And if you're broke, you just get really scared.
Yeah.
And that put even more pressure on him too, because he could think about, what actions is he taking and how is it going to affect his daughter's world, what she's going to grow up into. And you see that in the opening chapter where women have such limited options in this time period, and he wants to not have that for her. And so he gets increasingly desperate. And it parallels a sister who had even fewer options and turned out pretty rough.
Pretty rough.
Yeah.
But
I like to think charming, though.
I think that she is charming. His wife does not love her.
No, doesn't like her at all.
Doesn't like her at all.
Yeah.
And yet he is putting, I don't think this is a spoiler too much, he's putting everything at risk to help her.
Yes.
And so that's an additional burden, an additional wonderful weight that you put on the narrative there.
Thank you.
Yeah. I didn't know if you knew that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Good. I'm really drawn to this idea of fiction telling a story, but also being tied to a specific place and time. That is, you can't make everything up, right? You a lot of this, you were bound by the facts of the day, and I'm wondering, as a creative writer, how that feels different writing, say, this historical fiction, which this is, in that it reflects the time, and fiction where that's not an issue.
I think I like the constraints of it a little bit too. Like, you're putting it in a place, so the place becomes increasingly important, but you are limited by reality. And I felt like when I was doing the first draft, I didn't give myself any limitations, and I just kept typing and typing and typing. And this sort of bound me to find what kind of drama I could find, what kind of pathos I could find in a very limited space, and really dig into it as well. But I also, I made up a city. Initially this was New York. And like the ghost at E.L. Doctorow was just like calling out to me, and I didn't want to compete with him. He's really good.
He is a good writer.
Yeah. Even dead, I just didn't want to compete with him.
No, because he would come in and get you.
but so I gave myself the freedom eventually of changing it to a fictional place where I can make up a history, where I can make up neighborhoods in some way too. Even though it's based on Lower East Side, I can make up different kinds of neighborhoods. And that gave me a lot of freedom, even as I'm constraining myself by the fact this is in a specific year with a specific historical timeline.
Mm-hmm. Do you write non-historical stuff?
Yeah, that's what I'm working on right now.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's not, it's like based upon my childhood in the 90s, so I guess that's historical.
But you know everything. You were there.
I think I remember less of it than I
research.
I have had to Google shit about 1997.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't, what happened that year, and I was probably not doing good things to my brain at that point. So
this book, I mean, illuminates this time period in a way that I, of course, never had any. Did we lose this feed or something? They just checking you out. This is for posterity, folks. 1929, I don't know what you think of when you think of 1929, or maybe you know a thing or two about it. But in this book, it's a lot like, almost like the Old West, just in slightly better clothes.
How so?
Well, I mean, there's like horseshit everywhere. Everybody's beating up everybody else, shooting everybody else. There's no real, I mean, law is kind of just an idea. I mean, it's there, but of course, everybody who is in law is worse than the people that are.
Right.
You know, I don't know, I just never was under the impression that it was just, it felt like, there's a part in here where you talk about how the changing seasons, actually, would you read it? It's not, it describes what it's like to live in Port Kidd. And on the bottom of page 19, and just read that paragraph. It was past midnight.
It was past midnight, and his fists were deep in his coat, ice crusting to his shoulders. He was used to it. For most of the year, living in Port Kidd was just about surviving. In the summers, the wet heat grew roaches the size of boxing mitts. On top of that, there was always a sickness abound, something doctors called the Bonnie fever. And it came from old oyster shells and the constant wet of the soil and 400 years of above-ground burials. And the further you went into summer, the hotter it got, so that the discomfort reached a point where you just couldn't take it anymore and had to throw a brick through a window. And winter was no better. Bone-breaking snows that flogged the city for weeks. Your toes never dried, and it sent veterans, guys who wanted nothing more than dry socks, into fits of madness, recalling trenches along the Somme, leading some to loop a noose around a steam pipe. But in the spring, the city lied to you, told you tales. Elm blossoms and low necklines made you think you were living in a proper civilization. Everyone on the street, from your furnace workers to your mill girls, walked with a lightness. Even the guys who hadn't seen luck since the womb, the types falling out of the Catholic mission without a nickel to make a call, seemed to strut like men freshly fucked.
That's a great paragraph. That really gives you an idea of what it's like in this town, in this place, and it's and it just goes on from there. I want to talk about your inspirations, the people that the authors that you turn to. There's the style in here is, I would say, hard-boiled, right? And so there are lots of wonderful writers that you feel this, the gratitude for the echoes of. But who were they for you?
I think, so when I decided that this is going to be this is going to be a crime novel, I wanted to feel like a crime novel. And what I like about crime novels is the vibe. I liked the atmospheric living in this world, and I wanted to recreate that as much as possible. If I was going to go through it, I wanted to own it. So Elmore Leonard is like the one I read a lot as a kid. I just ate his books up. I loved how funny he was. I loved that he had, and I don't think we do this enough in fiction, is that many of his characters are idiots. Mm-hmm. We don't write about idiots very often because we like to write about ourselves, and a lot of the time we like smart people. But the world isn't inhabited that way all the time. And he had a facility with words and language that he was just fun, but it went to a darkness. And you have Raymond Chandler, of course, too, who's really good at similes, who has the atmosphere, and Dashiell Hammett as well. So you have those. And I teach mystery fiction at UNC, so I like to just sort of delve through this. But, modern ones like Dennis Lehane and Megan Abbott still have that sort of the griminess but they're also having fun with it as well. And so I like to go with that. But I also like Yale Doctorow's, like my hero. You know, Billy Bathgate is basically, you know, long, historical, beautiful novel about criminals. And you get the city and you get all the ideas about what the city can become and what it means to grow up in this place. But the plot moves, and I like that about that.
Yeah. Do you, are there any other contemporary crime or thriller writers? I guess there's the distinction to me in genre-wise about what is crime fiction,
Right.
what is thriller, and the books that you see on the bestseller list these days probably don't qualify as crime fiction, do they?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, like I think that, I mean, those sort of borders are dying in some ways too. I just read Percival Everett's newest novel, The Trees, which is basically like a mix of Law and Order, Beloved, and a zombie novel with Thomas Pynchon mixed in.
Right.
And it's just, it's fantastic. It's just two cops going around and like people are rising from the dead.
Right.
And I think that the genre, it gives you a sense of momentum.
Yeah.
It gives you a sense of conflict and stakes, but you can do a lot with it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Michael Chabon did the Yiddish Policemen's Union a couple years, like not a couple years, but like 15 years ago, probably now, which is about, you know, if Israel hadn't existed and all of the Jews moved to Alaska, which there was like an idea for that for a second. And he just like creates this atmospheric world, but it's really about identity and community and the costs of that as well. So I think you can do a lot with that.
Yeah, and the language that it inspires in a writer, I think, is delicious. We've talked about it before. I think Joshua goes into a bar, he's looking for his sister, and somebody looks at him and says, "Why hasn't anybody killed you by now?" It's like, I mean, that's the ultimate.
Yeah, it's fun when you have those lines too.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's cool. I'm gonna circle that, darling.
What was the other one? Do you remember what we were talking about, or said? Do you know? Can you remember any of the other one-liners? They're so strong. It's I can't put you on the spot. I can't put you on. This is terrible. I like. He's been a pile on the ass of this town forever.
Yeah,
I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. That's beautiful.
You just, I mean, like, it's fun because you get to like I live a pretty normal life. I have like a wife and a child and a full-time job and a 401k, I think.
Yeah, you think? Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I work at UNC sometimes.
Yeah. Hard to say.
Stuff. But you get to delve into the sort of like underbelly of the world and sort of just like live in it, and that's one of the fun parts of doing fiction is like living in the imagination that you don't exist in necessarily. I'm writing something much more autobiographical now, and I love that, but also just going into this sort of universe is just so much fun.
So there's no autobiography in here?
No. I think there's some stories from my grandmother in there, my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather was a bookie, so there's some of that stuff. He sang in Hollywood films too. He was a weird guy. 3 draft cards too. When my grandmother died, we went through all his stuff. He had 2 birth certificates, 3 draft cards, and the names were slightly spelled differently. Yeah,
wow.
And he sang
the opportunity to be killed 3 times.
I doubt he served.
Yeah.
From what I understood, he was pretty lazy.
Yeah.
So.
But are you in Joshua at all?
No, I don't think I am. I think in some ways he's not the opposite of me, but I wanted to distinctly make somebody who wasn't like me. Tall, for instance. I'm 5'11", but like 6'5", I thought, okay, that's gonna
tall. That's too tall, actually.
Yeah.
It's a little too tall.
Little too tall.
Little too
like
tall. It's like 2.5 inches too tall.
Okay. So I mean, like one of the main ideas is like I was going through these archives and I'm looking at war veterans, and you have like the Rambo type of PTSD where they just become violent maniacs, and he doesn't. He becomes a pacifist. He doesn't want to hurt anyone. And I like that idea of like trying to take this, this terrible trope about veterans and make it into something new. So I never served in anything. I'm also too lazy. Right. I don't get up that early. But yeah, no, there's nothing in there of me. I just wanted to make it up all together.
That's fun.
Yeah. No, like some of the pregnancy stuff, like that definitely. Like there's
some of that.
Some of that.
Do you think it's harder on the person not having the child than the person actually having the child, just having to watch it all happen?
I'm not going to say that.
I was baiting him.
The baby was 10.5 pounds, so it seemed a lot harder.
Well, I know that people have some of their own queries and questions, and I'd love to open it up to the floor here and see if anybody has something to ask Michael. Yeah.
Quick question. Does the name of the city, Port Kid, come from anything in particular?
I named all the neighborhoods and the city itself after pirates. Because I thought it was something about just like runaway capitalism and stealing shit. And it's piracy. So yeah. I just like I had to name everything and I'm like, okay, I just went to Wikipedia and just like picked out pirate names.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. I had no idea.
When you write a novel with a made-up city, do you have like a map of everything in your head, or how do you conceptualize
I drew a map.
Did you really?
Yeah, it hung in our bedroom office for a long time, just so I could like know where to go where the streets are and stuff like that too. So, I mean, it looks like kind of a warped Manhattan in some ways, but yeah, I drew a map. I had to. I could see where that.
What was your favorite part of writing the book?
Besides getting it published, is like the best part of it.
It was nice.
Yeah, just being done with it is great.
Yeah.
I liked writing about the marriage, I think, a lot. I thought that's what I wanted to have, and it's a marriage that's like on the rocks in a lot of ways too, because he stole a painting and like life is coming down on him too. But I liked that there was love there, and it wasn't cynical love. That there was something really genuine there, and I wanted to do that really well. And I found that really enjoyable. I found writing his wife really enjoyable.
Yeah, she's a nice person.
Yeah,
very smart.
Yeah,
you do wonder why is
she with him?
Why is she with this?
But like that
love
sometimes happens to all of us too.
Yeah. Why is she going out with him? That's not.
Or me. Yeah. Why is she?
Yeah.
Could you talk about how you edited this? You know, from 500 pages to 230 is a lot to cut.
Oh god, yeah, there was more than that. Like, because there's like, I mean, it's like 15 drafts. Like, I'm slow and I take a while. And
did you cut a bit and then later on?
I cut a couple hundred pages at one moment. Yeah, I just realized it had to go, and I just
you did it like and literally you just did it.
I mostly. Yeah, I did in the moment. I mean, I saved it just in case I was like wrong. It's not like Hemingway losing a suitcase. Like I was going to keep it in case I made a giant mistake. But yeah, I just had to cut it. Then I walked away and came back a couple days later. I felt better. And then you just start writing it and you move on from that. But you're constantly cutting, you're constantly adding until you refine it to what you want, and then you're going through it every sentence, just cutting and cutting and cutting. I think for the language here, in all these kind of novels, it has to be tight, it has to be concise, it has to have that atmosphere of moving really quickly. Otherwise, it starts to bog down the reader.
Yeah, Billy Batgate is an exception, but
most
of these books are shorter.
Right. I teach the first paragraph of Billy Batgate in my creative writing class, where it's like a 15-line sentence that starts off too, and it's incredibly beautiful, and I didn't want to write about New York after I read that.
Yeah.
Is Port Kid a northeastern
Yes.
city?
Yeah, vaguely, yeah. I try not to be too specific about it. I want the reader to imagine it.
But it's not a southern city.
No, I'm scared to write about the South.
Yeah.
You all own this place, and I'm from the San Fernando Valley, and that is
that you don't think you can do it? You can do it.
I mean, maybe I could write about Chapel Hill, but I don't think I'd want. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do it?
Yeah. No, I think you all own this place. That's good.
Yeah. Stay off our turf. We would hate something bad to happen to you. It'd be a pity.
I'd just be called a Yankee, and I'm really from the Valley. I don't know.
So I read the summary of the book, and I noticed that there's a dog with a 4-letter name. Is that a nod to Nick and Nora's Ostep?
No, I just wanted. It's Orla is the dog. There's a dog in all my books. There's a dog in all your books. This is one of the things we bonded over.
Yes.
Yeah, it was my. I just wanted an Irish name for it. It was based upon my dog that recently passed. She was very old, but yeah,
was she Orla? But
her name was Mabel.
Yeah,
yeah.
That's
she
right.
looked like
an Irish pub terrier.
I did call her an Irish pub terrier because we had no idea what she was. We got her at a farmer's market in Houston. They weren't gonna eat her. They had a shelter there. Texans aren't even that bad. But yeah, I think like having a dog in a story like grounds the story in some way too, because you have to feed the dog. You know, it's just like very mundane. So like the last chapter, he's like feeding the dog because like he doesn't know what's gonna happen to him, and the dog gets pissed at him when he disappears for 2 days. His dogs will, and it's just have a dog.
I agree. I tell all.
I have
my
a cat
students,
now. It's not as fun.
That's not. No, it just doesn't make good fiction as well as a dog does. And this is a hard truth.
Yeah.
I tell all my fiction students if the story's not working, it's probably for the lack of dogs. Usually, you just bring that in and it's fine. Am I right? I'm right. Yeah, there are people here agreeing with me. Yeah.
There's a couple cat people here.
Yeah. Cat person?
Yo.
Yeah. Well, there was a famous story recently written called Cat Person. I don't know that.
I
cats did
don't
anything for
remember
that
the
story,
cat
really.
in that story.
There's not really a cat even in it. So
I remember parts of that were not cat-like.
Yeah.
Okay, let's.
Anyway,
Yeah.
yes. But Asta, yeah, that's in future book events, I would take credit for that and say yes, that was an echo of the Nick and Nora stories. Yeah, that only the canny reader really can get.
Calling back Dashiell Hammett.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know a lot about the specific genre, but are there any aspects of kind of the crime genre that you didn't want to include in your book?
I'm trying to think.
Incest.
There's no incest.
There's no incest.
Yeah. I was down thinking of Chinatown. There's no incest. I didn't want the cops heavily involved. There's a cop in there. Wasn't interested in police officers. And he's not like a normal police officer in any ways too. He's more philosophical and not very good at his job. That was, I think, the main thing I didn't want in there. Yeah, I mean, there's red herrings, there's a whole thing, but yeah, that was the main thing I thought about too. I didn't want it to be cop heavy.
Cool. And it's not that guy's, cop with a heart of gold, although he's not, has no compunction about knocking you around with his, what are they? Nickel.
Brass knuckles.
Brass knuckles, yeah, not nickel. Brass. I guess close. I mean, nickel knuckles would hurt. Nickel knuckles. I was thinking of holding a roll of nickels, which you do sometimes, right?
You might.
I might.
So one of the things you have to do is like go through like the Sears catalog from the 20s to know what people are buying. And they had weapons. I think they even had brass knuckles at one point too, because they definitely sold guns, knives, batons, all of that stuff too. Because you just order it from the Sears catalog, and so you knew what regular people were buying based upon these like giant tomes that you could get it. I think I actually got them through Davis Library on campus, and you just sort of go through them and like, okay, they would buy this. This is what their clothes would look like, and stuff like that.
Wow. So your research really. Archival research was looking at the Sears Robot catalog.
Yeah, a lot of it. Yeah.
Wow. God, that's a really good note for me.
Yeah. Also Wikipedia.
Wikipedia really works.
Yeah, I don't know how they did this in the 70s. I don't know anything about guns.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel like Wikipedia.
No.
This book does not feel like Wikipedia. In fact, that should have been my quote on the back. It does not feel Wikipedia.
Better than Wikipedia.
Better than Wikipedia.
A Wikipedia article with more swearing.
Yeah. It's beautiful, but I do think that's a really good note, the Sears and Roebuck catalog, because that makes perfect sense. You're able to, that's probably like the kind of just a description of a time based on that one little.
Yeah, and it's like 700 pages of stuff.
Did you get the actual catalog?
Oh yeah, you can get the actual catalogs through the library, and you just sit there and just go through it, and like, this is what the dress would look like, these are what the boots would be like. These are what the glasses they would order, and stuff like that. So
that's great. I'm serious. So Matt, you said you wanted to ask a question.
Oh, did I?
Yes.
Well, I was thinking, when were you at the New York Public Library? Recently?
2013.
Okay.
Yeah. But I sent them a book, and I actually, in the acknowledgments, because I had to thank them because giving me money, and I apologized for them robbing the library.
Did you get to get that fellowship pitching this book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it was fun.
That's like a very nice thing.
I lived in my brother-in-law's basement for a couple of weeks, and I just commuted to the city. It was lovely.
Yes. Did you really? Was it really lovely?
Yeah, it was great. I loved living. I lived there when I was 18 for a year, and I like to go back. And my wife's from there, so yeah. I got to hold letters that Alexander Hamilton wrote to George Washington about the inauguration speech he was doing. They just gave me all this great stuff too. So
how did you keep them? Because apparently you can just take all that stuff home.
It didn't say classified on it or anything. Like it's just on parchment.
Yeah.
Apparently librarians are total radicals now anyway. So
yeah. They want you to take it.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other questions, queries? Yeah.
What's next?
I'm writing a short story collection about my adolescence, loosely based on it. I wanted to write something different. I didn't want to write. I hadn't written about where I grew up yet. I didn't think it was interesting because I left it and I wanted to leave it so badly. But I think there's something interesting in me wanting to leave it so badly. And I was really. It was actually reading Randall Keenan's latest essay collection because I was dabbling in it and reading his collection about his hometown. Not that I would ever compare myself to him, but the fact that he owned some part of this, state, and he just had his feelings about it, and he took it seriously, and I loved that about it. And I said, okay, I want to give this a try.
Because you lived there until you were how old?
18.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you imprint on it.
Yeah.
You can't help it.
Right. But it's a place I never want to go back to either. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can write about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even better.
Yeah.
Well, if we have no other questions, let's just call it a night.
Thank you all so much. I'm gonna get a beer at Luca Tigre after this too, if you want to come over. So. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey, guys, I know I just started, but you guys might even I'm sorry, I knew I wanted to make it. So.
You want Jeff or Jeffrey? Jeff is my student in life friend.
Oh, hey.
He's a big fan of yours too.
JEFF.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I've been a big fan. I watched the movie. I've never read the book, but it's one of my all-time favorites. Hopefully I'll like this skill.
So you're a student?
Yes, sir. You teach class?
Yeah. Did you do this semester? Well, I definitely don't. I'm on research leave and then I'm going to be in London in the fall.
So a year and a half, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, just check back a year and a half.
I really appreciate it. Thank you. Nice to meet you. Thank you guys for coming. Oh, how are you? It's nice to meet you. What's it?
I appreciate you getting this, and I hope you enjoy it. How are you? Let me know what you think all the time. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good to see you again.
That's great. Great question.
What?
That was a great question.
Oh.
I liked it.
Oh, well.
Do you know Maggie?
I've not met Maggie. Nice to meet you.
Maggie went to Ireland with me too.
Did you go to Ireland as well? Oh, I didn't know that. It was great, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. But I did get COVID after.
Oh, you were one of the ones that got COVID.
And lice.
And lice.
I said that.
You should write that memoir. My summer of getting COVID and lice in Ireland.
It's been quite the summer. So, having a good time. So, yeah.
Lice? Who would have thought?
Because I think I got one idea on my
Lesson learned.
I think purple was pretty cool.
Would you do it again?
Yeah, I hate frog.
But you don't feel like lice is something that's going to necessarily happen next time.
I went to a
Maybe I'll take
salon. Actually, that was the craziest experience I ever had. I went to a Beta Institute and
University.
Yes.